Welcome to Around the SEC, where we take a trip around the greatest conference in the nation, following the biggest storylines and making bold predictions. I'm your host, Mikayla Kelly, and officially coming on as my co-host is Micah Farmer. Micah, I'm excited to have you join as a co-host. I love to hear your analysis every week, so just felt fitting. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for keeping me on here permanently. It feels great.
It's going to be fun. And today we're joined by DeAndre Gaines. How are you doing today?
Doing wonderful, It's a thankful Thursday today.
Well, we're excited to have you. So let's just jump right into it. And we start off with Alabama, a team we've been saying is going to struggle and that the dynasty is over and whatnot, but they bounced back from a rocky USF game with Milroe back at quarterback and got the win over a talented Ole Miss team 24-10. After watching this game, do you think Bama can crawl their way back to the top this season?
I think when they play LSU later this season, that's going to be a pivotal game. It's in Tuscaloosa. If they can win that game, I see no reason why they can't make it back to Atlanta and maybe even win the SEC. This Bama team reminds me of more old-fashioned Alabama with a suffocating defense and a devastating run game more so than the air raid teams we've seen over the past couple of years. So yeah, I think they'll be fine after a rough start.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. Bama, they started the game off kind of rough. Monroe kind of threw an early interception that was kind of like right to the defense apparently, or pretty much. And after that, they pretty much bounced back from there. Monroe ran the ball a lot that game. I think Alabama's finally embraced the fact that Monroe is more of a runner than he is a passer. He carried the ball about 16 times, which is more than any running back on the team pretty much. And he's the quarterback. I think they really embraced the fact that he's more of a runner now than a passer.
I do think they finally have their guy, but I really think that it's premature to say that they can crawl back because right now the defense is still carrying this team. The defense was responsible for 4 sacks, and they really pressured Jackson Dart, who's I think has been a top quarterback in the conference this season. And then this next week they get Mississippi State on the road, who's dead last in third down conversion. So with the defense, I think this will be a pretty easy win. I think we need to see them get these next 2 road wins, and then, like you said, a statement win in LSU would maybe have me considering that they were back on top. But we've seen how competitive it is this season, and I just don't really see them finding their way into playoff position. But I do think that Milroe is very develop worthy. I think he's going to be their guy for the next coming years. We could see it. He played after that interception. He played a pretty clean game. So I think he's their guy here on out. But they really need to prove it in this next stretch of games.
Yeah, and the biggest test, I think for Milroe this week is his first road game. So, being the first road game, it's not really a crazy, game or anything like that. But, Mississippi State has those cowbells. It could get rattled in there, maybe scare him a little bit. But I think overall he'll settle in pretty well for a first road game and lead his team to victory.
Yep.
And we kind of went over this, but do you think they finally have their quarterback situation figured out?
For this year, I'd say yes. Like you said, Milroe, guy worthy of being developed. But I think once Julian Sayin gets there, it's going to be a different story, and he might end up starting next year for the Crimson Tide.
Yeah, I think, like you said, this year they're set. But after this year, it's kind of, we'll see. We'll see from there pretty much.
Another team that struggled this weekend was LSU, who squeaked out a 34-31 win against Arkansas in Baton Rouge, thanks to a go-ahead 20-yard field goal by kicker Damian Ramos. This was potentially SEC Game of the Week last week, and do you guys think that this game, despite being a loss, could help Arkansas build momentum for the rest of the season? And do you think the Hogs can maybe finish out close to the top of the West this year?
I think that coming into this game, it was a battle between 2 of the top quarterbacks in the SEC that I've said. Coming into the season, you saw KJ Jefferson, you saw Jaden Daniels. They both had outstanding games, and the Golden Boot every year, as they call it, based off the shape of the 2 states, for a couple of years now has been decided by 3 points, so you can see that there's a strong rivalry there. But in regards to Arkansas, I think they keep getting in their own way, and they have to stop blowing their first half leads because their quarterback is too talented to be playing like this, and they can really come out on top of these games that they haven't been if they just get out of their own way.
Yeah, I think simultaneously, the first half of that game as a whole was kind of a very defensive game. It was 10-13 at halftime. But then the second half, both offenses kind of took off from there. Both quarterbacks really showed, who they are, their true colors pretty much. And I think it was 43 points, something like that, scored in the second half total when it was only 26 scored in the first half. So I think the fact that both offenses bounced back and showed who they really are is really great for them.
Yeah, I think you're right. Like you said, Arkansas is a team that tends to get in their own way, and they did so a bit less this game, and I think that's why they were able to keep it close. And if Arkansas can keep getting their run game going, and you talk about KJ Jefferson, what a dual threat he is, if he can really take over both aspects of the offense, running and passing, I think Arkansas will be a hard team for a lot of other teams to beat later this season.
Yes, he's definitely a threat to pass rushers as well. He can quickly escape the pocket despite the lack of protection this team has. And it was a pretty even quarterback matchup. KJ Jefferson threw for 289 yards for 3 touchdowns, while Jaden Daniels threw for 320 yards and 4 touchdowns. So I think they're definitely 2 top contenders right now for SEC quarterback. But I'm excited to see if Arkansas can kind of keep this momentum going, or if they just kind of slide back into the mediocre team we know them as. And a team we definitely need to take a look at, a team that should be sounding the alarms right now, is our own Auburn Tigers. Last week, they were entering a tough 4-game stretch that included Texas A&M, Georgia, LSU, and Ole Miss. This A&M game, this was the game they needed to win. And now, looking down the road, I think it is highly likely that Auburn does not get in the win column again until Mississippi State. And it does not help their case that in the midst of their many issues, they now host the #1 team in the nation, the Georgia Bulldogs. What did you guys see from that game in College Station that Coach Freeze and the Tigers need to change to even have a chance against Georgia this weekend? A game that I don't think Georgia's favored high enough in, to be honest with you.
Well, I think it really comes down to quarterback play. You know, last week at A&M, it's what it really came down to as well. We played great defense pretty much the entire game. Our only touchdown came from our defense. And the only somewhat good drive we had was right before halftime when we kicked the field goal. And I believe if Peyton Thorne or Robbie Ashford, we're not sure how that goes. Whoever starts this week just need to, be comfortable. Don't try to run every play. Sit there, be comfortable, throw the ball at your quarterback. You need to be able to throw the ball, deliver the ball to open receivers,
Right, like you said, the only Tiger touchdown came from Eugene Asante, which what a play that was for him.
It was an amazing play.
It's very sad when you're going into a game against a team that's not necessarily super competitive. Let up 19 points against Miami, and your only touchdown came from a defensive player. And thank God for him, and thank God for Alex McPherson, who kicked a career-long 53-yard field goal. But that's just going to have to change our offense. The offense looked absolutely pitiful, and they really need to start worrying looking down the stretch.
Yeah, I don't know what they're going to do personally. Maybe you say give Holden Garretter a shot at this point, another guy with a big arm, because if Thorne and Ashford aren't going to do it, why not at least see what you have with the kid at this point? And you asked what I saw. I'll tell you what I didn't see is any quarterback that was comfortable in the pocket at all. As you said, 7 sacks allowed, and that is just not acceptable. If you play like that versus Georgia, you might end up allowing 10+, so you can't do that.
And another thing Auburn's just somehow notorious for is letting a backup quarterback come in and play better than the starter did, which prayers up to Connor Wegman. It was announced this week that he's out for the season on an ankle injury, but Max Johnson came in and really was who started the momentum for that A&M team. And that team had just embarrassed this Auburn team on Saturday. And so I know we touched on this. We know quarterback is the issue. And we were calling out Alabama early for their quarterback uncertainty. But they're starting to get the wrinkles smoothed out. And it just seems like Auburn, week after week, there's just no improvement. And they have yet to find their guy. What's your take on the quarterback fiasco going on in the Plains? And if you were coach, what would you be doing in regards to this position?
Well, it seems like at home, our quarterback plays significantly better. Against UMass and Stanford, our quarterback play has been, way better than it is on the road when we're
that's
in
also
Cal.
UMass and Stanford.
Yeah,
we're in the
that's also
Southeastern
true.
Conference.
That's also true. But I just really feel like once, just getting even those easy wins under your belt just kind of helps you get comfortable. Like I said, Peyton Thorne last week was just really lost out there. He didn't really know what was going on. If he actually gets comfortable this week, will be really good this week.
I think it's a difficult ask to ask someone to get comfortable versus that Georgia defense. I think, though, that you're right. We should leave Thorne out there for Georgia, but I think after that we should look to get Holden Garretter involved and get his arm going. He was the highest-rated recruit in Georgia coming out of high school, and I think Hugh Freeze should look to use that at some point this season.
I agree, and they've said for 2 years now, oh, this kid's got the best arm. Well, if he's got the best arm, the only way he's going to get more accurate is to get reps. And Hugh Freeze, I don't know if he's just kind of waiting until Walker White gets here next year and for that to be his guy, but we saw him develop Malik Willis up in Liberty. He knows what he's doing, and it just doesn't seem like he's picking a quarterback and sticking with it, which makes me believe he's waiting for his guy to come in. But I think Holden's really potentially a guy they could get in, and I think if we don't utilize him, he's going to go, and he's going to go be a stud somewhere else. And that just seems to be a pattern with us, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And so,
Look at Bo Nix and TJ Finley, what they're doing this year.
and I think going to the Georgia game, and one thing I do credit Hugh Freeze with, he's a realist. I think Auburn fans had higher hopes than they should have going into
Yeah,
this season.
definitely,
And
definitely
he's
did.
making sure to bring everyone down, being like, which
It's-
he was left a dumpster fire.
Yeah,
by our previous
Harsin
coach, and
left
so
some pretty harsh
it's
things
not
for
really
us.
his team. He's trying the best as he can with it, but we're gonna have to see, or we're just gonna be in for another potentially 6-6 season or worse. So
Well, 6-6 is better than when we were last year. You know,
At
it's
least we'll-
still a bowl
we'll be in
game
a
at
bowl
that point.
game,
Yeah, still a
so-
bowl game at that point. Last year, didn't even get that, unfortunately.
Let's talk about some more positive SEC stories now. Moving on to Missouri. The Tigers are now 4-0, and with a win over Vandy this weekend in Nashville, can improve to 5-0 for the first time since 2013. Do you guys think they get it done this week? And do you think that this Missouri team is legit?
I do think they get it done this week. We've been making fun of Vandy after their loss to University of Nevada, Las Vegas. So I do think they get it this weekend. Coming in at 5-0, I never thought I would see a Missouri team coming in at 5-0. Granted, they've not gotten to their hardest stretch of their schedule
Yeah,
yet. That's definitely in the second half of their season. But honestly, good for them. They're ranked for the first time since 2019, coming in at number 23. But they still have to take on LSU and Georgia. So I think that while the East is looking shaky, I don't see them coming out on top, but I do see them having a better season than they've had. And don't underestimate Brady Cook. We'll get to that later, but he is a truly amazing quarterback, and I think he's flying under the radar right now. So
Yeah, I definitely believe so too. I have him here on my stat list right here. Brady Cook is, I say, cooking. He is
Yes.
absolutely cooking right now. Last week, 18 for 25, 341 yards, 2 touchdowns. And I don't know, against that Memphis defense, he just looked comfortable out there throwing the ball and just sitting in the pocket pretty good. Pulled out the win for his team.
Yeah, as you said, it is Vandy this week, so I do think they pull it off, and Missouri will enter next week 5-0 for the first time since 2013.
And then another thing too, Missouri's offensive line as well. It looked very physical this past game. They were really controlling the line of scrimmage like the entire game. Almost it feels like they were just running the ball. Brady Cook had a lot of time to throw as well, which is also why he had a lot of passing yards and stuff like that as well. If the Missouri team could just keep up with the offensive line, the receivers, the quarterback play, running back play, I feel like this team, they won't, win the East, but last year they actually almost defeated Georgia, so I don't know. It could be shaky this year.
That is true.
We could see.
that was the first time Georgia got shaken up a little bit
Yeah.
last year.
Yeah.
You just reminded me of that. I remember seeing that come on the screen. I was like, "There's no way."
Yeah.
Missouri's gonna win that. But you can't take away that ranked win they've had this season already. So
Yeah.
this is definitely a season that's better than the ones they've had. So
Definitely.
good for Missouri, honestly.
Yeah.
Definitely.
And it isn't just Mizzou that has been a surprise either. The entire SEC East appears to be playing at a higher level than expected this year versus the West. Normally, the East has been considered the inferior division versus the West, but they have 4 ranked teams to the West's 3, and all 3 undefeated teams in the SEC are in the East, Georgia and Kentucky joining Missouri in that club. So, do you guys think that the East is legit this year? Do you think they're better than the West, or do you think that by the end of the season, the West reasserts themselves as the deeper and more talented division?
Now, I'm not going to say that the East is better than the West. The West is super competitive, but I do think what's fun about the East this year is that it's pretty decently even across the board, and it's going to be fun to kind of watch them beat up on each other. I came in saying Florida was going to be terrible this season, but they got a win over Tennessee. They take Kentucky this weekend. It's going to be really fun to watch, and maybe a few of them will challenge the juggernaut Georgia. I mean, we saw South Carolina get competitive with them a few weeks ago, so maybe one of them will be the ones to challenge it. And I'm just, for the first time in a while, this is the most excited I've been to watch the East.
Yeah, the SEC East is definitely on the come up, but I still feel like by the end of the year we'll know. Like the SEC West is still honestly the powerhouse, but when it's like the SEC West, they're all playing each other, so there's going to be losses there when you're playing, 2 juggernauts colliding every week, But I do feel like that Tennessee and Tennessee and LSU are always like the underdogs, and they're kind of in the East and the West. I feel like Tennessee and LSU are kind of just the sleepers.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And like you said, the East has so many teams this year, like Florida, Kentucky, South Carolina, Tennessee, all in kind of that mid-range of the division. I think when you compare that to the West mid-range and look at teams like Arkansas, A&M, Mississippi State, do you not think that any one of those East teams would go in and compete super easily with any of those West teams? So though I do think the top teams in the West are a bit better than the top teams in the East,
for sure.
I think that the East is the deeper division this year.
I think they could easily be competitive with the rest right now. I think majority of the East looks better than Auburn does, aside from Vandy.
Oh, yeah.
So,
to be fair, that's not a hard bar to clear right now.
Yeah, it's pretty low down there.
well, we're going to have to see as it shakes out because we're really getting deep into SEC play right now. In fact, I think this upcoming weekend might be the most
this is where the fun
exciting
begins.
week SEC-wise. I said last week was probably the most exciting across the board.
Yeah.
And it definitely was, but this SEC slate on Saturday is just going to be really interesting to see how it shakes out. A lot of things are going to change after this weekend, so I'm really excited to see how that plays out.
When we come back, you know what time it is. We pick our SEC Teams of the Week. We'll also take a look at some SEC quarterback frontrunners in the top 4 teams in college football. Should Georgia still be number 1? All this and more when we come back. You're watching Around the SEC.
Welcome back to Around the SEC. It's time for one of my favorite segments where we pick our SEC Team of the Week. Not necessarily the team we think was the best team in the conference right now, but who deserves a shout out for their performance on Saturday? And I'll start with my pick of the week, and this feels like a betrayal, but I have to go with Texas A&M. Like I said last week, they gave up 19 points to a mediocre Miami team. I said this is the end of Jimbo Fisher. They're not going to be good, and I said if Auburn can't cruise past them this week, there's going to be problems, and they held that team to 10 points. Also, most teams would crumble with the loss of a quarterback, especially one as good as Connor Wegman, but instead Max Johnson got in, and he looked more productive than when Connor Wegman was in the first half of the game. And on the other side of the ball, you have to give them credit because they held them to 2 field goals and no offensive touchdown. And I'm sorry, but they embarrassed Auburn on Saturday, and that's why I have to go with Texas A&M as my team of the week.
Yeah, A&M was definitely solid this past week, but for me, it's got to be the Alabama Crimson Tide. They took care of business versus Ole Miss in a game that a lot of people had questions about their quarterback situation, their offense in general. Could Alabama handle another ranked team coming into Tuscaloosa? And they took all that and said, we are Alabama, and we're going to beat Ole Miss in Tuscaloosa just like we always do. Lane Kiffin still does not know how to beat Nick Saban. This is an old-fashioned Alabama performance with a suffocating defense, a solid run game, and so for me, Alabama is my team of the week.
And my team of the week, I have to go with LSU. You know, after that first loss, week 1 to Florida State, they've really bounced back. You know, they've been looking definitely forward instead of backwards this entire time. This past game, they battled it out with Arkansas, went pretty deep into the fourth quarter, you know. Came from behind because at the end of the first half, they were down 13 to 10. And then second half, the offense really woke up. And Jaden Daniels really took over that game for them. And LSU defense, kind of not the greatest, but they still made the stop and needed to make a stop. And overall, I think LSU really played good this week.
Yeah, definitely an important performance for them. Like you said, the start of the season loss to Florida State, to keep building momentum through them for the rest of the year is really important.
They definitely shook that loss right off. But now I'd like to just take some time, just discuss the top quarterbacks in the conference right now. What QBs are standing out to you guys?
So to me, when you talk SEC quarterbacks, you got to start with Jaden Daniels. The guy's thrown 12 touchdowns, which is first by a mile in the SEC so far. He's completing 73% of his passes. He's thrown for almost 1,300 yards. And just for fun, he's added 193 rushing yards and 2 touchdowns there. The guy was in the conversation for the Heisman at the start of the year, and while I don't think he's still there quite at that level, I think he's definitely the top quarterback in the SEC so far this year.
Which I do think we came into the season kind of expecting that for him, and right now he's kind of living up to it. What quarterbacks are kind of standing out to you right now?
Right now, my standout quarterback has to be Brady Cook. Like I said earlier, he's cooking right now. This past game, like I said earlier, 18 for 25, 341 yards, 2 touchdowns, and just leading that Missouri team to a 4-0 record so far is just really impressive. You know, this week to go into Kroger Field, play Kentucky, and where is it, Kentucky? They play
Memphis.
Memphis. No, they played.
They're playing
played Memphis.
Vanderbilt
But
this
this week
weekend, yes.
they played Vanderbilt this week. I'm sorry, and I think that Missouri really comes out on top here because Brady Cook is just like I said, he's cooking right now. I don't see him looking back anytime soon. I think he's gonna keep this up.
I agree. I think
throughout
he's
the
the
season.
most improved quarterback in the conference over the course of the last season, and he's only getting better, and he's staying very consistent. In week 3, I said there's no chance of them beating Kansas State. I mean, Kansas State was a great team. They were up there at the end of last season. I said there's no shot Missouri gets a chance, and he had 2 passing touchdowns in a great game, and he matched that this weekend against Memphis, but we're really going to have to see when he plays these tougher teams. But right now he's sliding under the radar, and he's playing great. And a quarterback I want to point out who I feel unfortunately is stuck with a team that's not protecting him and he really can't shine is Spencer Rattler. I think we all know he has an insane amount of potential, and
Definitely.
he had nearly a flawless night against Mississippi State. I don't know if you guys caught that game, but he finished 18 for 20 for 288 yards, 3 passing touchdowns, and no turnovers. And having no turnovers is crucial.
Crucial, very
especially
crucial.
in this conference, because that could really make or break. And he currently holds a national lead in receiving yards with 556 this season. So,
Yeah, I think Spencer Rattler, obviously you got to give him credit. The South Carolina rushing attack is so awful this season that you look at that team, if they don't have Spencer Rattler, do you think they've won a game this year other than Furman? Like, this South Carolina offense would be absolutely nowhere without Rattler this
Yeah,
season.
without Spencer Rattler, I think South Carolina is one of those underlying teams that everyone kind of forgets about, like how Missouri usually is for the SEC East. But I think that would have been South Carolina. But I think with Spencer Rattler, they still hang around, kind of middle of the pack team, and just stick around. Maybe they'll get a bowl game this year. We'll see. But yeah, like you said, without that rushing attack, I feel like it's kind of iffy season for him
I think
as well.
it's unfortunate that he's stuck on South Carolina.
Yeah.
I think he could really flourish somewhere else. I know he was somewhere else, but
Imagine him on that Oklahoma team
But-
this year.
Yeah.
I just don't think South Carolina is really the best place to watch him thrive, which I feel like a lot of people aren't looking at him, but he's clearly a talented quarterback. And I think we said that with KJ Jefferson. He's kind of in the same boat. They're both really great quarterbacks, kind of stuck on a team that's not really protecting them. And so the last quarterback I want to point out is, even though he just lost to Alabama, I do think Jackson Dart has been looking great. I just think Alabama knew how to pressure him, but I think he'll come back and look a little bit better next week and kind of know how to adjust. And so those are kind of my quarterbacks going
I'd
into
agree
the
with
season.
that for Jackson Dart. He's also leading his team in rushing, so
Yeah.
leading Ole Miss in both facets of the offense, which I think is very impressive. But as you said, let's talk about something else, and that something else would be our top 4 teams.
I'm passionate about this one, I'll tell you.
So obviously, as you know, the college football playoff is the top 4 teams in the country, and the defending champs Georgia sit at the number 1 spot, followed by Michigan, Texas, and Ohio State coming off their win in South Bend this past weekend. Do you guys think this is the correct top 4? Do you think Georgia should be number 1? And if not, who would your top 4 be right now?
I'm going to start it off. Granted, if UGA had played a top team, maybe I think they deserve the number 1 spot. And honestly, they probably would beat the people behind them. But I feel very passionate that you need to put the team who has the best wins at the top right now, even if you don't think that's the best team right now. But I just think there's teams that have had such better wins than Georgia that deserve their spotlight, at least for now. Things can change and Georgia can come out as the top dog, but right now, who have they really played? Beating South Carolina in the second half, I just don't know how that
And that was only a 10-point victory
I don't know
as
how
well.
that puts you at the top spot. And so I'm just going to give my kind of top 6 because I think it could really swing either way. I have Texas at number 1. That's a little controversial, and we have to see how they do in these next 2 games. But they beat Alabama in a game. It's a huge, huge game. Everyone watching. They lost last season. That was a big win.
Yeah,
Then
on the
you've got-
road in Tuscaloosa.
Then I have FSU, which they're 100% winning the ACC. After that Clemson game, it really proves it. They've had a big win against LSU, a big win against Clemson. I think that is enough to put you ahead of Georgia, who beat, like I said, South Carolina and 3 cupcake teams.
Yeah.
And then I have Michigan and Georgia, just because I really do think if these 2 were to compete that they would win. But a team that I have right outside the top 4 that I think with a win over Oregon this weekend deserves a top 4, if not that top spot, is Washington. And I feel this way because right now I think Michael Penix Jr. is the best quarterback in college football. And right now my Heisman frontrunner. And I just think because he's in the Pac-12, he flies under the radar. Nobody's really watching him. But I was reading today that through 4 games, the 6th-year senior, which definitely his last season. Leads the nation in passing yards, passing touchdowns, yards per pass attempt, and completions of 30-plus yards or more. He's the best quarterback in college football. A win with Oregon, they deserve to be in the top 4. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, as you said, Washington, Michael Penix is going insane this season, and for that reason, I actually already have Washington in my number 1 spot.
Wow.
They're the number 1 passing offense in the nation. It is not even close. They have 467 pass yards per game. The next closest is Washington State, who are just barely over the 400 mark. Their passing offense is ridiculous, led by Michael Penix. The receiver trio of Rome Odunze, Jalen McMillan, and Jalen Polk is insane. And then they're also only allowing 17 points per game. Granted, not versus the best competition, but they have played a Power 5 opponent in Michigan State and held them to 7 and ran them out of their own stadium in East Lansing. So as you said, big test versus Oregon this week, but I think I've already seen enough for Washington to put them in my top spot. And they're closely followed by Michigan, like you said, a team that was just up there last year and retained most of their important players. Blake Corum is back. J.J. McCarthy appears to have taken a step forward, and I think Michigan is going to win the Big Ten again this year. My 3 spot is Texas. As you said, going into Tuscaloosa, beating Alabama is a very impressive win. Quinn Ewers looks amazing. The receiver duo of Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell is just up there with Washington in terms of talent in the passing attack. And then for me, my number 4 to round it out is Ohio State, coming off the win versus Notre Dame. I know that might not be popular.
I still think, I could be biased. I grew up a Notre Dame fan, but I still think Notre Dame's a better team than Ohio State, and that was just a really heartbreaking ending, but I need to see them win another big game to kind of justify. But I did have them kind of right off in the next spot, and with Penn State, who they still have yet to kind of play a big game, so they've got a lot of hype around them and could be a contender, but same thing with Georgia. I need to see them play.
Yeah, I think it's still kind of early in the year
game
for some of these teams for us to really like judge them. Really, I think like maybe 2-3 weeks from now we'll be able to like have some like pretty set, solid rankings. But you're gonna hate me for this. But for my number 1 spot, I have Ohio State. I only have them up there because they have probably the most signature win of the year so far. You know, I don't know if y'all saw that, but at the end of the game, the Notre Dame game, there's only 10 players on the field for Notre Dame. I don't think that 11 player would necessarily make a difference, but it's still a great win for Ohio State. And then my number 2 spot, I have Texas. Obviously, you go on the road, beat Nick Saban. Only 9 teams have done that since 2010. And like I said, this Texas team, I feel like there's something special on this Texas team. It's just different energy.
Like a win over Bama is a resume booster. It doesn't matter what Alabama team you're playing. It's Nick Saban and the Crimson Tide.
Exactly.
Especially going into Tuscaloosa.
That's enough to convince me.
Going into Tuscaloosa on the road in a night game as well. And you go and win. That's next level. At number 3, I have Georgia, because Georgia. Like you said, cupcake schedule so far. They've been tested a little bit with South Carolina. But that's why I feel like they're not top 1 or 2. They still have to prove themselves, I feel like. So a lot of football left to play as well. And my number 4 spot, I have Michigan. They haven't really played anyone either. The last game they played Rutgers. I think it was like a 31-7 win. Still a long way to go for them as well. But same time, their schedule is looking not too crazy hard. Jim Harbaugh gets back, and just a long way to go for them.
Yeah, obviously you have the game at the end of the season each year with Michigan and Ohio State. And I think, obviously, the winner of that game will probably be in the playoffs. And as you said, with Florida State, I think Florida State will be right there ready to slide into that number 4 spot once one of those teams loses that game.
Which, mind you, I do think Georgia will be in the playoffs. I just think that's how it's going to shake out. They don't really have anything blocked in their way, and a win in the SEC championship, they're going to be there. But I'm still saying there's not going to be an SEC team in the national championship this year, and I stand by that.
I don't know. I feel like with Georgia, it's kind of like they're going to get caught slipping one of these games. Keep these games too close sometimes. Like South Carolina, like we've been saying a lot. South Carolina game was way closer than it should have been. And one of these teams are going to, take advantage of that weakness that they're showing right now and just come out with the win on top of them. And just for that kind of 5th spot, I would say, I'll probably put Florida State right there. They don't really have any crazy wins. Obviously, they won last week against Clemson, but the week before that, they barely beat Boston College. Boston College almost came back and beat them, and I feel like that kind of drops them in my rankings. Just being that close with Boston College is kind of, Boston College isn't anything crazy, so I feel like being close with them kind of dropped them in my rankings personally.
Well, this is the most excited I've been watching college football in a long time, and I love the back and forth right now. There's no team that's the top team right now, and there's probably 6 or 7 teams that could be taking any of these spots, so we're just going to see how this shakes out the rest of the season.
Yep. When we come back, we're making our picks for the biggest games across the conference right here on Around the SEC.
Welcome back to Around the SEC. Now let's make some picks for this week's biggest games. And first, we'll start off with Texas A&M at Arkansas, but it's neutral site in Arlington, Texas, as they do every year. So it's kind of close enough where no team really has the home field advantage. Right now, Texas A&M comes in as a 6.5-point favorite. Who are you guys taking?
Personally, I'm taking Arkansas. I think that last week, the win over Auburn for A&M, Auburn's not that good, which is sad to say, but I think Arkansas is a much better team than Auburn. Arkansas just kept it close versus LSU this past weekend, and I think Arkansas gets it done in Arlington over the Aggies.
And he's taking the Hogs.
Me personally, I'm going to go with the Aggies. You know, I feel like after last week, Dave, backup quarterback came in really, I feel like dominated the game once he came in the game, because the game was kind of slow last week until he came into the game and kind of threw 2 touchdown passes. So I feel like Texas A&M in this one are going to pull through.
Now, while I agree with both of those points, I have to say that I don't think a win over Auburn is proof enough to me that they're going to win this game, and I think KJ Jefferson's the better quarterback. And so for that reason, I'm taking Arkansas this weekend. Next up, we've got a rematch of last year that actually ended in a Tennessee loss with a great Volunteer team, an upset no one really saw coming. But this year it's being played in Knoxville. Right now, Tennessee comes in at a 12.5-point favorite. Who are you guys taking? Will Tennessee get their revenge or not?
Tennessee does get the revenge versus South Carolina. Josh Heupel is going to have those guys ready to go, especially with it being in Knoxville. I don't think Tennessee lets South Carolina win 2 in a row over them, and I think the spread is pretty close to this game for what it'll actually end up being, but I am going to take Tennessee.
And I'm going to hop in the same boat. I'm going to go with Tennessee on this one. Night game, Neyland, a revenge game from last year. I definitely feel like Tennessee is going to pull this out.
So I don't know if either of you have ever been to Knoxville, but I actually got to be in Knoxville last year when they beat Alabama. I saw that goalpost walk right in front of my eyes, and so they're passionate up there, and I think they want their revenge. We saw how they played against Bama, who's beat up on them for years, and so I think they're going to come in and win this game. I do think this spread is crazy. I think it's going to be a super close game, and potential to be game of the week, to be honest. It really could swing either way, but I'm going with Tennessee at home in Knoxville. Next up, a really interesting matchup. I was back and forth on this one all week, and it wasn't until yesterday with a gut feeling that I picked my pick. But it is LSU at Ole Miss in Oxford, Mississippi. And right now, LSU is favored by 2.5. But how do you see the outcome of this game turning out?
I think this is going to be a shootout type game. 2 good quarterbacks, Jaden Daniels, Jackson Dart. And when you have a shootout with 2 good quarterbacks, who's the better quarterback? And the better quarterback is Jaden Daniels, and therefore I think LSU comes into Oxford and gets this win.
I'm also feeling the same thing. I think LSU comes into Oxford, pulls out the win, just because, like you said, quarterback play is going to be very important in this game. It's going to be like a non-defensive game, shootout. I think Jaden Daniels gets it done now this week.
Now, for this whole week, I was like, well, it's in Oxford. This is a great Ole Miss team, but then I had this gut feeling, and I was like, they just seem like the team to get rattled by one win. They got by one loss. They lost Alabama last week, and I just kind of see them stumbling here and out. They just don't seem like the team to recover, unfortunately. And LSU was able to bounce back off that loss to Florida State, and they've been rolling. They've got the best quarterback in the SEC right now. I think it's going to be a fun one to watch, but I think the Tigers of the Bayou take it in Oxford, Mississippi this weekend. Another interesting matchup in the East is Florida at Kentucky, and right now the spread is extremely close. Right now Kentucky's a 1-point favorite, but how do you see this game turning out?
Well, Florida used to absolutely own Kentucky. However, in recent years, this has been a close back-and-forth series. I think this Florida defense has been a lot better than people expected. Even though they kind of got their offense didn't really do anything versus Utah, the defense still played well in that game, and I think that defense will be enough to shut down the Kentucky run game this week, and so I think Florida pulls one out on the road close.
Yeah, again, piggybacking, but I do believe Florida does pull this one out. You know, right now they're the underdog, but I do feel like, you know, Florida, they're going to be Florida this week. They're going to dominate the game as they should, and just really control the game, control the line of scrimmage, run the ball, pass the ball.
All right, well, I guess I'm coming in, and I'm in the minority here, but I'm going to take Kentucky this week just because I think that win in Florida over Tennessee was the environment was what won that game for them. I think they still have to find their offensive identity. I mean, Kentucky also took a few losses to the draft as well, but I think in Lexington, I think this will be another close one to watch, but I'm taking the Wildcats this weekend. That's my risky pick of the week, if you will. And our last game, the one we'll all be at on Saturday in Jordan-Hare Stadium, the Deep South's oldest rivalry, the Georgia Bulldogs, the #1 team in the nation, comes to our home territory to take on Auburn. And they come in as a 14.5-point favorite. And I'm just going to say, I don't think that's high enough, and I think they're going to beat up on us. But I'll get to my pick in a second. I'll let you guys share your picks first.
Well, you can't be one-dimensional versus this Georgia defense, and Auburn has no quarterback play. So you add 2 + 2, and you get 4, and you get that Georgia is going to beat Auburn pretty handily this weekend, I think, as sad as it is to say.
Going to be the underdog here. I'm going to go with Auburn in this one. Non-biased opinion here, I promise. But I really feel like, Georgia, they kind of keep games closer than what they should. I feel like Hugh Freeze is really going to get on his quarterbacks this week in practice, yell at him, get on him, get on him, get on him. It's like this week's basically going to be better quarterback play. I still don't know who the quarterback's going to be, but I do feel like it's going to be better quarterback play this week. I'm going with Auburn in this one.
I think it is unfortunate that in a Georgia down year, some might say, I mean, they haven't taken a loss yet, but a Georgia down year, this was the time for Auburn to come through. This is definitely the weakest Georgia team I've seen in my 4 years here, but, I mean, we just don't look great, unfortunately. And I'm biased, but not too biased, and I'm taking the Georgia Bulldogs this weekend. And that is all we have for you today on Around the SEC. Thank you so much, DeAndre, for coming on. We had a great time with you. I hope you did as well. And I'm Mikayla Kelly.
And I'm Micah Farmer.
And we'll see you next time on Around the SEC.